Hi guys, we continue our performance task preparations and we're going to be looking now at a social studies sample. Again, we are not necessarily doing social studies at grade 6, but getting familiar with the items and how they are presented is important. So let's look at this, and I mean it's good revision anyway. The social studies mock performance task presented students with a real-world scenario in which the community of Garden Tavern has been negatively affected by the environmental issue of soil erosion, and this is something that we pay particular attention to in grade 6, and we looked at this in first term. This task provided students with the opportunity of demonstrating their skills of gathering, using, and interpreting information from multiple sources in order to develop arguments and draw conclusions. So again, PT is about demonstrating your skill and using information from multiple sources, and you will have to compare and contrast and explain and justify, summarize, and show details. All right. To respond to this performance task, students were required to carefully examine 3 sources: a passage, a cartoon, and a pie chart. Then answer to different questions posed using predominantly information from the different sources in their responses. So here, this time around, not just 2 sources, you had the passage, you had a cartoon, and you had a graph here, a pie chart, right? So it says here, the task consisted of 2 parts. Part 1, students were given 3 questions. Question 1, students were asked to indicate which source or sources provided information needed to answer questions asked. Question 2, students were presented with a question and asked to indicate which of the 3 sources is most helpful in answering the question. Question 3, students were required to state which 2 sources provided factual information and which one provided an opinion. Okay, so let's go with this: fact and opinion. All right. So, but sir, this is social studies. Yes, it is. But the language arts concepts of fact and opinion are important in answering this question. So all of the subjects are actually what? Related and integrated. Now for part 2, students had a task of writing a report using information from 2 of the factual sources. All right, let's go. So the objectives assessed in the social studies performance task were as follows: to define and use the concepts or terms correctly: erosion, erode, sediment, topsoil, and deposition; to explain the role of wind and water in erosion and deposition; to examine different types of human activities that contribute to the erosion and deposition and propose how these activities may be modified to reduce erosion. So here's a question now. Erosion in Garden Tavern. It says, you are the leader of the environmental club at your school. Your principal called you into her office to tell you about an urgent project. The people in your community are concerned about erosion in the area. The plan is to have an environmental club meeting to discuss the issue of soil erosion in the community. Students, parents, teachers, and the members of the community will be invited. I need you to summarize what you have learned about soil erosion in our community and report to me next week. You went to the library and found three relevant sources on the topic: a passage, that's one; a cartoon, and a pie chart. You must review these sources before reporting to the principal. The instructions: you will read the passage and the cartoon and then examine the pie chart. You may make notes from each of the sources. You can use your notes to answer the questions in part 1 and to help you write the report in part 2. Now time for source 1. Erosion in Garden Tavern. The land in the community of Garden Tavern seems to be getting smaller and smaller as water and wind continue to remove the topsoil. Community members who are over 50 years old are shocked to see that areas in the community where they played as children now have deep holes. The main economic activity in Garden Tavern is farming. Over the years, the farmers have been clearing land by weeding and burning. The farmers who plant yams on the hillsides have cut down all the trees in order to plant their crops. The main source of water supply is a river that runs through the community. The residents use the water for all their domestic purposes: washing, cooking, and bathing. Several years ago, they caught fishes in the river, which form part of their diet. However, persons have been dumping garbage in the river, and the river is now getting closer and closer to their homes. Recently, the river has overflowed its banks and caused damage to many houses and washed away crops. The most recent concern to the members of the community is a new road which passes through the community. Since the road was built, more mud and stones have washed through the community, removing topsoil and leaving large holes all over. Many of the people feel that Garden Tavern might soon disappear. They want back their community the way it was 10 years ago. And here we have the source, passage taken from the Environment Today magazine. So that would have been source 1. So let's discuss source 1 a little bit and make special reference to our previous knowledge. So we know that erosion is the removal of topsoil. How? We have erosion by water, we have erosion by wind. So once we're removing topsoil, that's erosion. All right. Now we have here that what's this now? If you cut down all the trees, that's, deforestation, right? And how did they get at this? By what? Weeding and burning. So we could call that what? Slash and burn, right? Now they have the water source there. They used to catch fish. Now the river seems to be getting wider and wider, getting close to their homes. So they have a problem of what? Flooding. That causes what? Damage to what? Many of the homes. It even washed away what? Crops. So maybe they need some river training, right? So river training is where you will see them putting little baskets, stone baskets. They have a special name for it, but they have some baskets that they put stones in, and they, kind of help to keep the river flowing along a certain course, right? So here now they have a road that passes through, and now they have mud and stone coming into the community, and finally they want it to go back to the way it was 10 years before. So that's source 1. Now, if you notice what we just did a while ago, do you know that that is kind of a summary? We didn't read every single line, but guess what? We spoke about the main ideas or the main points as we were moving through the what? Through the passage. Now, that is important for you to be able to do so that you can get the what? The gist, the overall feel of the passage. Okay? So let's go on to the next source now. Next source we have here. In the cartoon below, a farmer and a road construction worker discuss the issue of soil erosion in their community. So here we have the worker, we have the farmer. Clearly by how they are dressed, we know the difference. The guy with the hard hat would be the construction person. The one with the straw hat would be the farmer. Okay. I am so happy for the new road, but I am so sorry for the banana farmers who have lost some of their crops. Yes, we are upset, and rightly so. Most of our banana farms, which are beside the new road, were washed away last week when the rain fell. It is sad because you farmers need good roads to transport your crops. But if the erosion continues, soon there will be no land. You construction workers have to plan better so that the land is not washed away. So based on this, we can see that there is a relationship between the new road, excess water, and the impact that it would have on the bananas and washing away the land. All right. Where is this taken from? So here's the source, cartoon taken from Garden Tavern newsletter. Okay, source 3. The president of the Garden Tavern Citizen Association did a survey among the members of the community to find out what they think are the causes of soil erosion. The result is presented in the pie chart. All right, so here we have the pie chart. Causes. So here, most of the people believe that cutting down trees for farming caused that. And then we have the Garden Tavern citizens believing that dumping of garbage in the river is a contributory factor, as well as the road construction. Okay, so let's go on now, and we see it says here, write the important points from the sources. These points will not be scored. So this is kind of for you to make your own little summary. All right. So here you would say source 1, what are the main ideas in source 1? And you list it there, right? Then source 2, you do the same thing. And you would also do that for source 3. So you make those jottings there. Now, based on those jottings, you answer the question. Question 2, which source is most helpful in answering the question below? What are the problems caused by soil erosion in Garden Tavern? Explain why this source is the most helpful. In your explanation, give 2 details from the source. All right. So, just so we can jump back a little bit. Source 3, main causes. So here, source 3 helps us to see the causes of soil erosion. So here, we have road construction as one cause, dumping of garbage, and cutting down the trees. That's another cause, right? And you have causes here listed for source 2, and in source 1 we have some details there as well. Let's go back to the question to get the focus of the question. Okay, what are the problems? So we need to identify the problems and then explain why the source you have chosen is most helpful. So if I want to identify the problems, right, I need to look at the sources carefully and see which one of them gives me most information concerning the problems. All right, let's see what they have. What is being measured? What is this item measuring? Question 2 sought to measure the extent to which students were able to identify sources which provide information needed to answer compelling questions. This concept of compelling questions, we must pay attention to it. You are going to be asked compelling questions, questions that are not yes or no, questions that allow you to really stretch your thinking. And you also, as students preparing for PEP, need to be able to formulate compelling questions as well. Not just to answer these compelling questions, but to look at something. To be able to look at something. Look at a passage, look at a pie chart, look at a table, and come up with your own compelling questions. Now hear this. It says specifically, students were asked to what? Examine 3 sources, then state the source which is most helpful in answering the questions. What are the problems caused by soil erosion in Garden Tavern? And explain why the source they selected is most helpful in answering the question. In their explanation, you would have to provide 2 details from the source to support your selection. Let's see. And this would be the rubric. So the examiners would use this to help them to mark your paper. So it says 2 most helpful sources identified, adequate evidence-based explanation of why the source is most helpful. The explanation is supported by 2 details from the selected source, or one of the 2 selected details may be loosely stated. Or most helpful source is not identified, however the explanation supported by 2 details from one source. Okay, so we go on now. So that's level 1, that's level 2. Level 1 now, most helpful source is identified or not identified, partial or very limited evidence. So you see the difference between having a level 2 and a level 1. You give enough evidence, sufficient evidence, but in a level 1 response, the evidence is limited, right? So limited evidence based explanation of why the source is helpful. So you just say, boy, I think that the passage is the most helpful one, but you don't say why. Or I think the cartoon is the most helpful one, you don't say why. So that would be limited evidence based explanation. The explanation is supported by 2 loosely related details from the selected source, or the explanation is supported by only 1 related detail from the selected source. No. Level 0, no explanation and detail, or explanation and detail incorrect or irrelevant or blank, or the answer is uninterpretable. I can't make sense of what is there. So let's look at the sample responses now. So sample responses, level 2. So let's go with this. Source 1 is the most helpful because it tells you the problems caused by soil erosion in Garden Tavern. That's quite so. The pie chart, for example, tells us what they believe the causes to be, but not necessarily what the problems are. All right. So if we go back to that quickly, we see it says here what causes. This focuses on the causes, right? And then this only talks about one problem, right? But when we get into this one, we see what the cause is, what erosion is, right? We see weeding, burning, cutting down of trees, but also we see damage to houses, crops being washed away, and stuff like that, large holes being left in the community. So that one gives much more in terms of the details as to the overall what problems that are there. So going back to this response, the reason for why I think source 1 gives you more details is because, as stated in the source, it said recently the river has overflowed its banks and caused damage to many houses and washed away crops. It also said that since the road was built, more mud and stones have washed through the community, removing topsoil and leaving large holes all over. This is a very good response. That is why I think source 1 gives more details than all the other sources. This is a good response. This gives a perfect summation of source 1 and why it is the best source to choose. Let's look at the response from the markers. Part 1, question 2, level 2. Most helpful source is identified with adequate evidence-based explanation of why it is most helpful. The explanation is supported by 2 details from the selected source. Let's see if we can find at least 2 details. So the reason is recently. That's one form of evidence, right? Recently it overflowed, and since the road was built, that's another one, right? So we have at least 2 reasons there. Okay, let's look at this one. Source 1, student B. Let's see. Student B. Source 1, because it has the most problems out of all the sources listed. That's good. Example, the members of the community who are older than 50 are shocked to see the areas where they used to play now have deep holes in them. And another example is that the community seems to be getting smaller and smaller as the water and wind remove the topsoil. So again, most helpful source is identified because the person indicated source 1. Then adequate evidence-based explanation of why the source is helpful. The explanation is supported by 2 details from the selected source. Again, this would be a level 2 response. So we notice that the style of writing may be different, right? This person, is more elaborate in their writing style, right? This person would be more concise in their writing style. But guess what? Both of them have a level 2. As was said before, there are many ways to get to Maypen. We can take the bridge. We can take the highway. But we still end up with the same level in terms of the quality of the work that is produced. We continue now and we look at a level 1 response. The source that helped me the most was source 1 because it has the most notes and the most sense, I guess. Soil erosion caused the topsoil to be washed away. All right. This one is a level 1 response. The examiners have the following. Most helpful source is identified. Yes, they say source 1, so it's identified. But let's look at this. Partial or very limited evidence based explanation as to why it is helpful, right? Not a lot is said here. The explanation is supported by only 1 related detail from the selected source. Need more than that in order to get a level 2 for that particular question. Let's look at D. The most helpful source about the question is source 1. It tells you the things that are caused by soil erosion. It washes away crops and damages houses. That's all the problems caused by soil erosion in Garden Tavern. Okay. Student D has identified the most helpful sources. However, the explanation provided was supported by 2 loosely related details from the selected source. All right. So you have to make sure that you have strong points in order to get to your level 2. Let's look at a sample response now, level 0. So I think source 3 tells us more because it shows us the pie chart that shows the amount of trees are cut down, garbage in the river, and also shows us the road construction. Showing us the chart helps us because it shows the problem and shows us what the problem is about and how big the problem is. So it is very helpful in that way. These problems really need to be fixed. The trees need to grow, to be grown back, because we need breeze and oxygen. We need to stop throwing garbage in the river because the kids play in the river and bathe too. They need to fix the roads because the farmers need to transport their crops, and we need to drive as well. All right. Level 0. The student has not identified the most helpful and provided explanation and details that were incorrect. Now, is the information here, good? Yes, it's good that we want the place to be fixed up. It's good that we want the children to play in a clean river and all of that. But is this related directly to answering the question that was asked? Right? And it's incorrect because source 3 is not the source that you should look to first. Source 1 is the best one. Right? So if you say source 3 and then try to defend why source 3 is the best one, and you don't even come close in terms of providing details towards the position that you hold or that is accepted, then you can't expect to get a very good score overall. So this person would have gotten the level 0 because, first of all, they have source 3. Source 3 is not the best source overall for answering that question. So that puts them clearly at a disadvantage. And then the details provided, they don't really help to prove that point as well. Let's look at another level 0. Source 3, because the pie chart says the percentage of people and one of the percentage is 3/4. So clearly this person is looking at it in a mathematical sense. The question here, the explanation and details provided are incorrect. And here it is, the source incorrect. And then how does this help to answer the question asked? Clearly, you're not going to get a good score for that particular response. Alright guys, well, that brings us to the end of this episode. In this episode, we looked at the social studies performance task sample question. It had to do with erosion, something that you need to know for our own exams here at grade 6. Please continue to revise and make sure that you are understanding how to answer these PEP questions. Think carefully, think long, think hard, and do your best on your exams.